Chapter 2.1 continued. We're going to do the second half of the section, and just an important key idea here as we start to get into multiplying mixed numbers. When we do that, you're going to write each mixed number as an improper fraction and then just multiply the fractions the same way we did in example 1 and 2. Now, just to remind you what a mixed number looks like, remember that a mixed number is going to be made up of a whole number and a fraction together. So 2 3/4 is a mixed number, and to turn that into an improper fraction, the way it says to do right here, then what you're going to do is you're going to multiply your denominator by your whole number. So in this case, you're going to multiply 4 times 2, which is 8, and then you're going to add that to your 3 up there. And we practiced that a little bit in the 1.6 extension, but we're just going to go over it one more time. So 4 times 2 is 8 plus 3 is 11, and so you would put that as your numerator here, and then you just keep your denominator the same. And so this is called an improper fraction, and it's called an improper fraction because the numerator is bigger than the denominator. So just kind of remind yourself or put those into your notes that that's the improper fraction, and this side over here is the mixed number, because we're going to be using those terms a lot from now on, and you want to remind yourself what it looks like. For example 4, we're going to be multiplying a fraction and a mixed number together. So we're going to find 1/2 times 2 3/4, and this just happens to be that same mixed number we were just talking about. And remember, we said anytime you have a mixed number and you're going to try to multiply that together with a fraction, you're going to turn it into an improper fraction. So 1/2 is going to be multiplied in this case by 11/4, and remember we got that when we multiplied 4 times 2, which is 8, plus 3, which is 11, so that's there, and kept the fourths. And one of the things we said in the last video was that multiplying fractions is one of the easiest things you get to do with it, because you don't have to mess around with common denominators. You just get to multiply across your numerators and your denominators, and then you have your new fraction. One thing we did remember to look for was to see if there was any way we could simplify before we multiply. So when I look diagonally, I can't get 1 and 4 to go any lower because the only thing they have in common is 1, so they would stay the same. And 2 and 11 don't have any common factors. 11 happens to be a prime number, so it can only be divided by 1 and itself. And 2 is also prime, so it can only be divided by 1 and itself. So again, if they can only be divisible by 1 in common, then we just leave them the same. And we just multiply them across. So 1 times 11 is 11, 2 times 4 is 8. And just like we mentioned at the beginning of this video, if you find yourself in a situation where you have an improper fraction, you're going to have to go ahead and make that into a mixed number. And you do that by finding out how many times your denominator can go into your numerator. So in this case, it can go in 1 whole time. So 8 can go into 11 1 whole time, and that's going to become your whole number part of the mixed number. And then if you were going to take the 8 away from the 11, then you would have 3 left over. So you would take that 8 away, whoops, make that an 8, and then you would get your 3 left over, and then you would keep your denominator the same. So your final answer here would be 1 3/8. Example 5 has us multiplying 2 mixed numbers together, and so it asks us to find 1 4/5 times 3 2/3. Step 1 reminds us to write the mixed numbers as improper fractions. So 1 4/5, we're going to take 5 and multiply it by 1, which is 5, and then add the 4, so that's going to give us 9/5. And then 3 times 3 is 9, plus 2 is 11, so that's going to give us 11/3. Step 3 has us looking for common factors to divide out, so we're going to look diagonal again, and the 9 and the 3 do have a common factor. They can both be divided by 3, so we're going to do that, and 9 divided by 3 is going to become 3, and 3 divided by 3 is going to become 1. We can look the other way, but we can see that 5 and 11 aren't going to have a common factor. They're both prime, so they're not going to have anything in common other than 1, and so we're going to rewrite those fractions underneath as 3/4. 5 times 11 over 1. Step 3 is to go ahead and actually just multiply those fractions. So 3 times 11 is 33, and 5 times 1 is 5. And the last step is to simplify, and in this case, simplifying is going to actually just mean turning this improper fraction back into a mixed number. So 5 can go into 33 6 times without going over. Whoops, get the pen function going there. 6 times, and then 6 times 5 will give us 30, so that means we're still going to have 3 left over, which will be our new numerator, and that's going to go over the 5, and so our final answer would be 6 3/5. Here are the on your own problems. As you're checking your answers, notice that I did show you how to do the dividing out process or the cross simplifying process, and also notice that anytime that says the or and it goes to a mixed number, the final answer actually does have to be these boxed answers. So it's good to know it if you got the right fraction, but if you leave it in improper fraction form, you won't necessarily get full credit. You need to make sure you take it all the way to mixed number form. The last example in this section, example 6, is another real-life application, and it says a city is resurfacing a basketball court. Find the area of the court. And remember, we've been figuring out that the area, if it's a rectangle, then we do length times width. So area of a rectangle is equal to the length times the width. Since we're multiplying, it doesn't actually matter which one is the length and which one is the width, but we're going to say that the length of the court is 21 1/3 meters, and then we'll multiply that by the width of 13.5 meters. And before we multiply anything, we're going to remember to turn these mixed numbers into improper fractions. When we turn these two into improper fractions, we take the 3 and multiply it by the 21 and add the 1, and that gives us 64. And remember, I'm not necessarily doing all of that in my head. Please set up the side math on your notebook. Find an organized way to do it, but make sure you actually set it up. Don't try to do too much in your head. And then on the second mixed number, 2 times 13 plus 1 will give us 27, and that's going to go over 2. And we are going to start to look to see if there's any area that we can cross simplify. And in this case, we can do for sure that 3 and 27 have the common factor of 3. So if we were to divide those out, this would become a 9, and this would become a 1. And when we look the other direction, the 64 and the 2, since they do both end in an even number, we can tell that they're both divisible by 2. So we'll go ahead and divide them by 2. Of course, this is going to become 1. And then again, if you can't do 64 divided by 2 in your head, do the side math. But if I cut it in half, I know that 60 divided by 2 is going to give me 30. 4 divided by 2 is going to give me 2. So 30 and 2 would be 32. But again, that mental math trick doesn't work for everybody. So don't be afraid to do the side math. It's better to get it right than to try to do it in your head and to get it wrong. And then we're just going to go ahead and rewrite those new fractions. So 32 over 1 times 9 over 1 here. And then we're going to go ahead and multiply across. And the side math again for 32 times 9 should be done, but it does end up being 288. And then 1 times 1 is just 1. And remember, anything over 1 can just be turned into a whole number. It won't actually technically be a mixed number. It will just be the whole number 288. And in this case, because it was a word problem, we do have to check for a label. And it was asking, we go back and check what the actual question was. It was find the area of the court. So that means the area of the court is 288, and it was in meters, because up here it said it was meters. And remember, when we multiply meters times meters, it's a little bit like exponents. It's meters to the second power, or meters squared. And all area is always going to get that squared units. So the final answer is the area is 288 meters squared. So in chapter 1, we kind of made that estimation part optional, and we said we weren't necessarily going to go through it all the time. In chapter 2, it's going to become even more helpful to use that estimating because fractions can get a little tricky sometimes. So if we were going to take that same problem we just did with the quart and take 21 and 1/3 times 13 and a half, if we wanted to estimate those, then we would say 21 and 1/3 is pretty close to just 21, and you can kind of do the estimating by looking at your numerator compared to your denominator. So 1 is definitely less than half of 3, so we would kind of round this one down and keep this at 21. And in 13 and a half's case right here, again, we kind of use that halfway rule, 5 or more, and you kind of round up, less than 5 and you keep it the same or round down. So we're going to actually make 13 and a half into 14 for estimating purposes, and we're going to multiply. And again, you should probably go ahead and set up the side math so that you're not trying to do too much in your head, and it's also good multiplying practice. Some of us still need that. And when we do that, then we use an estimated answer of 294 because that's what we got when we multiplied those together. And when we do estimate answers, we use the squiggly equal sign because it means approximately equal to. But if you look back one screen, you're welcome to see, or not one screen, but if you look up to the example ahead, what we got for the actual answer was 288. And you can see that 288 and 294 are pretty close together. So that means that probably we were on the right track. If you'd been really far off, then you might want to stop and rework your fractions or just double check your math on your estimation. Here's one more on your own problem that goes along with that real life application. So you're going to find the area of a rectangular air hockey table that is 8 1/4 feet by 4 3/8 feet. So this one has quite a bit of side math and gets a little bit longer, and I showed you the division for turning the improper fraction back into a mixed number. Sorry about the one little mix up, but at one point this 9 right in here looked like a 7 because I didn't realize the pen didn't drag it all the way out. So check your notes and make sure that that doesn't look like 175 because I did go back and fix it when I realized the pen didn't make the whole 9. So everything in here then tells us, and we want to make sure we understand what it all means, that if 1,155 divided by 32 is going to turn into a mixed number, it means we get 36 whole groups of that. So that's our whole number here. And then we look at the remainder, or what's left over, and that actually becomes the new numerator, so 3, and then our denominator stays the same. So that means that 1,155 30-seconds becomes 36 3/30, and then remember it was an area question about the air hockey table, so it was feet squared should be your units. Here are a few practice problems for you to try. Big green, you're going to go to page 60 and you're going to do 26 through 36, just the even problems. And remember to show all of those steps of writing the original problem, then turning things into improper fractions if they were mixed numbers, then any kind of cross-simplifying that you're doing, rewriting those fractions, and then multiplying them. And then if you have to do any turning improper fractions back into mixed numbers, go ahead and do that, but make sure that those are being shown step by step, just like I did in the video, and your notes should show it too. Then you're also going to do problem 42, which is an error analysis, and then problem 45 has two parts, A and B. Everyone's going to do 45A, and if you'd like to do an optional challenge, then go ahead and also try 45B.